It's 5 o'clock in Pirate Country, and it's time to get pumped up with the P-Man. Hit the door and hit the road. 94.3 The Game is going to get you home, and the P-Man's not holding back.
Yes! Yes! Pirates win! Pirates win!
Bring on the Patrick Johnson Show on 94.3 The Game.
Holy mackerel! Oh, my goodness!
The flagship station of the ECU Pirates.
All right. Hello again, everybody. Thanks for being with us. Final show of the week. Fresh edition of the Patrick Johnson Show. Best of tomorrow. Pilk, I wanted to do best of tomorrow with Igo and Rini. I made that executive decision, and I didn't tell you. So I'm sorry. I'm telling you now.
All good. All good.
It's the meeting for the show on air. Nothing wrong with that.
No, the audience likes to know what happens, I think, behind the scenes. So it's a little fun to do behind the scenes.
We're peeling back the curtain a little bit here.
Yeah.
Got a great set of guests today. Chris Lee, who works for WRAL Sports, and filmmaker Cliff Baumgartner are going to be our guests coming up. Next week on PBS North Carolina, so on the PBS station, 10 o'clock Thursday night, there's going to be a documentary that'll air. It's called When Giants Walked Here, and it's about pro wrestling in Dorton Arena back in the day. And this was like a multiple-decade enterprise, probably about the time that I started to get into wrestling. I remember them still, because they used to do on the syndicated shows or on the TBS Saturday night shows with NWA and then World Championship Wrestling. They'd mention the places they were going to, and they would always talk about the Dorton Arena. But that phased out eventually when that company went national. I don't think WWE, to my knowledge, ever wrestled when they were WWF in the Dorton Arena. And Jim Cornette told me a great story one time about the walk from the locker room. The locker rooms are just rotten in that because they're at the end of one end of the building and they're down underneath, and it just is such an appropriate and historic venue. I mean, and you would pack 4,000 or 5,000 in there every week to see pro wrestling, and it was part of the loop. It was part of the weekly loop. Pretty wild stuff. A different world territory wrestling was, but looking forward to those guys coming up in just a little bit. Scheduled to have Jenny Dalton Hill on Monday, Pilk. Multiple-time national champ, All-American. She, of course, is an analyst with ESPN for softball. I've worked with her a few times over the years, and Jenny is going to be in the studio with me on Monday for the show. What do you think of that, Pilk?
I like it. I'm looking forward to it. Anytime we get an in-studio guest, it's a different vibe.
Yes.
I think it's going to be a good interview.
Looking forward to having her on to talk about Little League Softball World Series, which starts Sunday. Okay. Pilk, I know what a baseball fan you are, right?
Oh, yeah.
And, there's been a movement, and I haven't really been able to place my finger on the movement other than is it just kind of a cool page on Major League Baseball, on Facebook about Major League Baseball. But, there's this page on there, and I've followed it for years, MLB Raleigh. There's a group of people that want Major League Baseball in Raleigh. I'll tell you who does not want it is Capital Broadcasting, because they have the Durham Bulls, and that would totally screw that situation up. But Tom Dundon, who is the majority owner of your Carolina Hurricanes, is involved in this now. And this is Brian Fork, the new Canes CEO. Tom is very serious about bringing an MLB team to Raleigh. Will be taking the lead to help pursue it. This is Doug Wharf, the new Canes president. The pursuit of Major League Baseball is a legacy project. To be involved is monumental. Now, again, I'm not saying that this MLB Raleigh or Raleigh MLB movement on Facebook is affiliated with Dundon, but this has enough under it now that Dundon has apparently got behind it. Now, what were the things kind of holding up relocation, or more appropriately, expansion? In a way, relocation was. night before last, after 20 years, Tampa Bay's search for a new stadium is over. The Pinellas County Commission voted to spend over $300 million for a new baseball stadium. The principal owner, Stu Sternberg, says this is quite a monumentous day for the franchise, the fans, and the entire region. The deal will keep the Rays in St. Pete for at least another 30 years. Groundbreaking is set for January. The stadium should be ready for opening day 2028. It will seat under 35,000 people and be the most intimate ballpark in baseball. The Marlins Stadium seats about 30,000, doesn't it, Pilk? In Miami, when they rebuilt it, or they built it new, it's not a huge stadium, if I'm not mistaken. Do you know that off the top of your head? I was down there when all that opened, and I don't think it's not that big of a stadium.
37,000.
Yeah, so it's really not that big of a stadium. Well, I guess it's about average size. And they're talking about a 35,000 seat stadium. Now, why is it important with the Rays? Because they were probably a candidate for relocation. They're going to stay in Tampa. The other candidate that baseball kind of had to get situated before things could happen, and this has actually turned into a little bit of a mess, were the Oakland A's. And aren't they going to have to play in like Stockton or Sacramento or somewhere like that next year?
Sacramento, yeah.
I'm predicting right now they wind up in Sacramento.
Full time?
Permanently, yeah. Because I read last week the financing has not been secured yet for the stadium in Vegas for the A's.
Yeah, I've heard the Vegas thing is kind of a crap show. And, you know,
it's a crap shoot, if you will.
Yeah.
Hey-o!
The other thing is, you know, we've gone away from the sharing of stadiums, with the exception of hockey and basketball. Yeah. And even had we not, I don't think a baseball field could fit in the new Allegiant Stadium where the Raiders
it
play.
Wouldn't have made sense.
They didn't make the stands correctly for it. They're not movable. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think it happens. I know they had bought the land, but, I mean, you can turn around and sell land, especially this day and time. Land's prime real estate. So,
and Sacramento, you know, everybody jokes it's a cow town, which it is, but it's Northern California. It's the capital of California. The Kings, when good, and even when they haven't been so great, have drawn okay there.
Yeah,
they have a, and I think baseball staying in Northern California is a positive. You don't want it to just be the Giants, because there's a long lineage and history with the A's. Google how far it is between Oakland and Sacramento.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like it's the town over, but I mean, it's not like it's not like it's a gazillion miles away.
Think of how many Northern California residents, and I'm not talking about big city people, just suburb people, probably
like
baseball.
Get into Northern California, it is a lot of farmland in Northern California.
Yeah, and you know, these people probably like baseball and want to go to baseball games, but they don't want to go into the Bay Area because it's unsafe, because traffic is horrific. Like, Sacramento's a city, yes, but it's a city like, Raleigh or Richmond?
Yeah.
As
State
opposed
capital,
to,
like those, yeah.
Yeah, not a massive, you know, just crazy metropolitan area like the Bay is. It's 82 miles away, hour and 25-minute drive. So
yeah, I didn't think it was that far.
Yeah.
So yeah, you retain some of your fan base if you play in Sacramento, the Sacramento A's. What's wrong with that? Now, isn't the minor league team there called the Bees? Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah, I didn't know what the mascot is.
Or is it the Papers, the Sacramento Bee? Anyway, my point is, you mentioned Raleigh. Let's go back to that. Pilk, you were not old enough to remember this, but about 25, 30 years ago, there was some thinking around the time the Hornets came, before the Panthers came to your home city of Charlotte, that you would put a Major League Baseball team somewhere in the Greensboro Triad area, because you put it somewhere, it'd be along 85. You'd be able to pull people from Charlotte. You'd be able to pull people from the Triangle. And obviously you have the Triad Metropolitan region. It never came to fruition. It might have just been talk. It might have been just, conversation around the local eatery breakfast table. So the reason I bring that up is because this movement to have Raleigh, there's talk of Charlotte, but there's nowhere you'd have to put the stadium downtown. The stadium they have for the minor league team is not expandable. And I think even if you imploded that in a sense, you couldn't build it you know that city better than I do. You know it like the back of your hand. There's not a whole lot of room to build out, even if you imploded the stadium. There would not be.
No,
in other words, it's kind of locked to what it is.
Yeah, you'd have to shut down a part of Graham Street, which would not be ideal with the logistics of that. You would have to shut down part of, would that be 4th, 3rd? Either way. Actually, there'd be 2 roads that run horizontal. Yeah, it would not. It just wouldn't work.
It's not doable. Yeah, it's really not doable in Charlotte. You can't put it in the upstate or across the state, the border in Charlotte. Or in South Carolina, that would not work, even though Charlotte has grown. I don't see that working. Do you?
No.
And I think the Triad is out. So the triangle thing is not that easy. Remember the project they were going to put in South Raleigh?
Yeah.
Where 40 runs, and it was going to be the concert venue / soccer entertainment. Well, that has kind of gone by the boards with Charlotte FC, and you're not going to have Triangle FC or Raleigh FC or anything like that. Why not build the baseball? I mean, you could build the baseball stadium there. You're at one end of downtown. That whole area has been revitalized. It's starting to be revitalized with houses and all that around it. You can still build the entertainment district. To me, it makes a lot of sense. And with Tom Dundon behind it, I think there's a little bit in the way of wheels and momentum behind it now. All right, what do you say about the possibility of Major League Baseball in North Carolina, specifically Raleigh? What do you say, Pilk? I kind of would represent Raleigh because I lived there for a few years.
Yeah.
You, of course, would represent the Queen City, the great state of Mecklenburg, Charlotte.
Yeah. So my only vouch that I'd do for the Queen City would be you already have a nice facility up in Concord where you run 2 NASCAR races a year. How about finding a way to, you already have press boxes and all that to use the pit road area. I don't know with walls how logistically that would be, but
you want there to be something at the Charlotte Motor Speedway other than racing so bad you can taste it.
That was where they were thinking about playing the football games there for a while. So, I don't know. For the Raleigh area, look, there are plenty of people that I know that are East Carolina fans, that I know that are Triangle sports fans that love college baseball and watch it adamantly and enjoy MLB, but do not have a team. Therefore, I watch Gavin every time he pitches. I watch Burley when I have the chance. And there's a lot of these people that I know that have said, hey, if we got a baseball team, that would be my MLB team. Because, baseball is not like football. Like, there is not a single person who's going to watch NFL that doesn't already have a team that's just going to adopt a team if they expand. Like, NFL expansion, I think, is other than going out of the country, is probably, you're just not going to have a fan base. But I think MLB, man, especially in the South, Raleigh, New Orleans, you got a lot of core people that grew up playing baseball. They love high school baseball. They love college baseball, and they may or may not have an MLB team. Plenty of Braves fans, of course, but I think it'd be big. And then they probably would be in the division of some of these local teams, whether they're in the AL East, you got Baltimore, you got Boston, you got New York. And then in the NL, a lot of Philly fans, our guy Mark Miller, and, of course, a handful of Braves fans as well. I don't know if I ever met. I think Wags is the only Nationals fan that actually exists. Other than Wags, you're right, they're close, but I don't know
I'm
if
talking
their fan
about
base exists.
I'm talking about proximity. And as screwy as Major League Baseball is with their television, it's not like you're encroaching on somebody's television market if you get Raleigh. You're just not.
No, you're actually keeping blackout games from happening. So maybe us Red Sox and Yankees fans can actually watch our team when they play the Orioles because it won't be blacked out. So that would actually be a good thing.
So I think that actually would be a good thing. I don't know. I just thought it'd be, with the Dundon thing being involved, to me, that gives it some legs. How realistic it is, especially when you have Montreal still vying and wanting a team, although they, it was up there and it succeeded after it didn't succeed, it failed. It kind of ran its course. There seems to be some desire for a team in Portland over the years, Nashville, because of its footprint and that it is growing. But is there truly a movement to put it in the Carolina? I mean, look, we're one of the most populous states in America now, and you have people moving to the Triangle region by tens of thousands a day, or a month, I should say. I mean, the numbers, I haven't seen them in a while, but you have a lot of people moving to Wake County every day. And it is pretty interesting. We'll see. There's a lot of factors at play, quite obviously, from the municipal level on, through Major League Baseball. But I think they've got to figure this Oakland thing out first. I really do. Before they go into expansion. That's what I think it would be. I think it'd have to be an expansion team. All right. Speaking of Raleigh, Dorton Arena and the documentary on Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, NWA Wrestling, When Giants Walked Here. It'll air next week, and we're going to have the two producers, including Chris Lee from WRAL, on to discuss it after this on The Patrick Johnson Show. So coming up next week, there's going to be a fascinating documentary airing on PBS North Carolina, and it is about Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling in the Dorton Arena. It's something that is in the blood and the DNA of everybody from North Carolina, it seems, that grew up here all those years ago. And a couple of guys are behind that. Chris Lee has been with WRAL Sports for the last few years. He's one of the guys behind it. And Cliff Bumgarner is with us as well. Cliff is a filmmaker, Slugline Media. Those guys are the producers of this and put it together. It's awesome to have both of you here on the Patrick Johnson Show. Chris, let's start with you. Hello. We've spoke a few times on the phone, but it's nice to talk to you here on the program. And thank you for taking some time with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for just the opportunity to talk about this film. I used to be a professional wrestler and lifelong wrestling fan, so I'm excited to help share this with the world. Happy that Cliff asked me to come along to help him out with this project, and we've something we've been working on for a while. Excited for the world to finally have it.
Hey, Chris, thank you as well for being on, or Cliff, thank you as well for being on with us. Cliff, give me an idea of how this thing got off the ground.
Absolutely. So I'm a Southern boy, born and raised in Raleigh, North Carolina, and growing up around here, I feel like, especially when I grew up back in the early 90s, being a wrestling fan wasn't really a choice. It's just kind of part of the culture and part of what you did. And so I grew up a huge wrestling fan and also grew up kind of in the shadow of Dorton Arena, right there on the North Carolina State Fairgrounds, and being around Raleigh my whole life. And the two things are irrevocably linked. And as a kid, I used to hear about it a lot. Hey, there used to be wrestling at Dorton. There used to be wrestling there, but there were no matches that I could go to. And I always kind of wondered why that was. And years later, started doing some research and found that there was this fascinating story that's not only about Dorton Arena, but about this cultural institution of professional wrestling in this part of the state. And we started delving into the story about 3 years ago, and here we are today with a finished film.
So the film is When Giants Walked Here. It'll air on PBS North Carolina. It'll premiere August 8th at 10 p.m. And you can go to a Q&A at the Rialto Theater. Our guy Hayes Permar with that. It is free on August 6th. It's in Raleigh. It's at 7. I think there is a pre-registration with that, but it is free, and there'll be a Q&A and a screening. And again, that's August 6th. Chris, how did you mentioned you'd wrestled independently? How did you get involved with this from the perspective of Cliff and you linking up?
Well, first I want to say that the event next week is as of right now, it's a free event, but it's sold out. All the seats have been taken.
Okay,
but it is
gotcha.
a free event, so it's a free event, so a lot of people may drop out. So still go to pbsnc.org and sign up for the waiting list if you're interested. More than likely, there will be people who will decide not to show up because they didn't spend any money to go. So don't want to keep people from going. but
Right.
just want to allow you to know ahead of time, just in case if there are not any seats. But Cliff and I both worked at WRL. I'm still here. I started March 4th, 2020, the week before the pandemic, literally a week before. And during that first week, I met a lot of people, and a lot of people don't remember meeting, but a lot of people after the pandemic went home. And I think Cliff was a part of the folks who ended up going home. And so in 2021, after he had left WRL, he sent me an email about this. And before I got to WRL, I being a former pro wrestler, knowing the history of wrestling at WRL, since wrestling used to be, shot here, I wanted to do something big with wrestling, a big project, and I didn't know what. And the pandemic kind of held that off a little bit. So once I got that email from Cliff telling me that what he wanted to do, it felt like a godsend, honestly. And so I just jumped on it. We hadn't met in person before that, and we built a lot of our relationship on the phone. And I think we met for the first time when we did our first interview with C.W. Anderson in June of 2022. So since then, we've kind of built a really nice friendship, and I've learned a lot from him when it comes down to filmmaking and how to tell stories on this level. So I'm just excited to see what the fans think of it.
Coming up on August 8th on PBS North Carolina at 10 at night, it is When Giants Walked Here. You can watch that. That's the premiere date across the state of North Carolina. Cliff Bumgarner with Slugline Media and Chris Lee with WRAL Sports are behind the project. It's about pro wrestling at Dorton Arena. So, Cliff, there was the origins of televised wrestling that Chris noted. WRAL, they were one of the TV stations in Charlotte that would also have studio wrestling. And then it seemed like the old Charlotte Coliseum, which is the Bojangles Arena now, is the Independence Arena. Of course, the Greensboro Coliseum, and then Dorton Arena in Raleigh. And then around the time that, we're all roughly the same age. I'm a little older than you guys, I think. But, that time where it's the early 90s and wrestling is national, it's not regional anymore. It is... it's the events are like at the Greensboro Coliseum, and they'd matriculated away from something like Dorton Arena, which would, I guess, maybe run in the territory days semi-regularly, if not weekly. So is it just as simple as the product got too big for Dorton Arena, or was there a little more to why wrestling kind of left Dorton Arena?
Yeah, so I think one thing to kind of set the stage for that people don't know is that there was professional wrestling in Dorton Arena every single week for more than 30 years, from the 60s all the way into the early 90s. So this was a weekly institution in town that people made this close, relationship with. And then, as you mentioned, wrestling kind of went national. You started to see the WWF, which is now the WWE, expand and buy up territories all over the country. And then Crockett Promotions, who Mid-Atlantic Wrestling promoted here in this region, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, who had sort of owned the territory around Dorton Arena for many, many years. They ultimately sold to Turner Broadcasting, Ted Turner's company. It went national. You get WCW and this national touring promotion, and they wanted to be like WWF. They wanted to go around the country. They wanted to run big buildings all over the place and get more fans in, and it became more about television and more about this, this much larger production. And they moved away from those individual regional communities like Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and like Raleigh, North Carolina with Dorton Arena. So you actually saw, just as things got bigger in a way, they also just weren't as interested in those local regional fans that had been their crowd for so long. They wanted to go and try to get the national and even the international attention. And so these people who had made those relationships over 30 years in this community lost something that, again, it was different than just seeing wrestling on TV. This was your town. This was people knew the wrestlers. People, these were people they felt like were friends or family, or they would go to Dorton Arena and have their seat where they always sat with their grandparents. And, that personal relationship for a lot of people was lost. And for a lot of people, it didn't come back. We're fortunate that wrestling has come back in Dorton Arena, and people have an opportunity now with a couple of shows a year to rebuild that. But for a long time, that was lost.
Chris, when you got into the pro wrestling side of things, you know, it had reached the point where I guess the independence was the term that was, you know, what it was referring to, and it was sort of sub-regional. I mean, it was a real kind of small geographic area for especially compared to the national things. And you're from the Triad, if I'm not mistaken. So, you know, where did Dorton Arena exist in the pantheon of a guy like you that was a fan that went on to become a wrestler, and you know, a guy that kind of split the distance between Charlotte and Raleigh? Would you ever make treks to any of these arenas?
Yeah, so for me, I'd always grew up hearing my dad. My dad grew up in Yanceyville, North Carolina. My mom grew up in Danville, Virginia, close by Yanceyville. And my dad would go to shows at Greensboro. He'd go to shows at Dorton as a kid. So I always heard about it. I have some family that lived in Raleigh, so I would see it when we go to the state fair or just driving by. And, you know, I'd hear the stories just like Cliff said, you know, he heard. But for me, like Greensboro Coliseum was the place. That's the place where I went and actually saw a lot of wrestling growing up. But as an independent wrestler, I wrestled starting in 2012. Wrestling hadn't been back to Dorton yet. So it wasn't like in my mind as a possibility, as a place to go wrestle. I always had Greensboro in my mind. And pretty much the year that I stopped was the year of the big, you know, big time wrestling show that came back to Dorton.
Right.
And I remember, you know, seeing it, and some people that I actually wrestled with were on that show and thinking like, man, I wish I could make it out there, but I had to work that particular night. And so I couldn't make it out. But it was always this place that I always heard about, and, you know, heard about the big matches and stuff. But this documentary, working on this, helped me get into it a lot more and understanding what it really meant here. Because again, like for me, where I'm coming from, I call it Starcade City. You know, it's from Greensboro. That's the big place.
The Madison Square Garden of the South is what you know, Greensboro Coliseum was. I mean, that was the big for the Crockett Mid-Atlantic territory. That was the big arena, and had the big crowds. Chris, when I imagine you mentioned a couple wrestlers you guys talked to. I mean, we're talking guys like Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, you know, household names in that regard that wrestled Road Warriors back when it was in its heyday, and even before that, Piper, Valentine, others as well. But I have to imagine, picking up on something Cliff talked about a moment ago, there were fans that, you know, this was part of their weekly entertainment. This was part of their, you know, life, part of their, you know, how they budgeted and spent family time. Did you get a chance to talk to any old fans in any of this?
Absolutely. There's this fan by the name of John Hitchcock we had a chance to speak to. He has a book that's out that's called Front Row Section D. He's based out of Greensboro, and so him and his friends back in the 80s were part of the first group of fans to start bringing signs to wrestling events. They were kind of famous for talking trash to the baby faces and to cheer on the heels, the bad guys. It was some of the first examples we saw of that, which actually was a big inspiration to what would end up happening at the ECW arena when ECW started coming around in the 90s, actually. And a lot of that inspiration came from those guys in Greensboro. So John Hitchcock would travel, go to shows at Dorton Arena, go to tapings at WRL, things like that, and was known by a lot of the wrestlers. Still runs a shop in Greensboro, a comic book shop, and has a lot of exclusive memorabilia and things that, you know, wrestlers have signed. He's good friends with Ric Flair. So he's in there. And he has a lot of great stories. He called wrestling a religion in this area. We also have David Crockett, the son of Jim Crockett, in there. Jimmy Valiant, George South, Bobby Fulton, C.W. Anderson, Shane Helm, Earl Hebner. So it's a lot of good names within wrestling, but then also people who are from this area who experienced Dorton Arena. And John Hitchcock is just one of the best examples of that.
All right, we're going to have more with the guys here in just a moment. A quick timeout here on the Patrick Johnson Show. The movie When Giants Walked Here, PBS North Carolina, it debuts on August 8th. We'll also tell you about the premiere event coming up next week as well. So stay with us. More with Chris and Cliff right after this. Coming up on August 8th next week, it'll be When Giants Walked Here. It's about pro wrestling in the Mid-Atlantic region in Dorton Arena in Raleigh. It was a weekly enterprise and something that defined the Raleigh sports scene and entertainment scene for decades. At the Rialto Theater in Raleigh in the Five Points area on August 6th at 7, they're going to have a Q&A and an airing of the movie. It is sold out. I think you can go through Eventbrite and go through the PBS North Carolina website and still sign up and get on the waiting list. It is a free event, so there's a chance you might be able to get in that night. Chris Lee from WRAL Sports is here. Cliff Baumgartner is also one of the producers of this, and they both are with us here. Cliff with Slugline Media. Hey, Cliff, when you look at, kind of just Chris talked about the fans and the wrestlers. What were the big memories of Dorton Arena from the fans, but also from the wrestlers?
I think the number one thing that we heard, surprisingly enough, wasn't about a particular match or a particular thing. I mean, the building is this amazing structure. You didn't hear about that so much, but everybody said the building had no air conditioning. That was the number one complaint / comment I think we got across the board. And we actually spent some time on that in the film because it becomes a factor in what that environment was like. To this day, Dorton Arena has no air conditioning. So that was something that came up a lot. Also, just the fact that, as we said before, this was a weekly show. There was a little bit of television done in Dorton, but not a whole lot. And so now we think about wrestling as this big television production. But this was every single week. If you wanted to go see your wrestling, television just built the angles. It just built up the show. Mm-hmm. To go see it, to go see the matches you wanted to see, you had to buy your ticket. You had to be there ringside. And so the memories that people have are very special because they only exist in the moment on that night. You know, these weren't things that were often recorded or that we have a ton of record of. We were lucky enough to get access to some exclusive photographs that carry us through most of the film that are remarkable. Most of them have never been printed or seen before. But I think for so many people, they just had these uniquely personal memories of this experience that was theirs and that was special to them at that time. And that's kind of the tone and the magic that we hope to capture in the film.
So when you guys did the movie originally, Cliff, it almost would seem like, and Chris, if Chris has an answer on this too, which I'm sure he does, it seems like the project came before the distribution. I would guess that's usually the case the majority of the time. How did you shop this around, and what made you settle, guys, on PBS North Carolina? And Cliff, I guess if you know a little bit about that, you can go. You know a lot about it, I'm sure. So go first.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so you're right. When the film began, we thought this was going to be much smaller. Initially, this seemed like, I'm a filmmaker full time. Chris doing sports and now doing films with WRAL. This seemed like a fun passion project, night weekend thing to do, something to just kind of flex our muscles a little bit and try something different. Very quickly, we realized that it was bigger than that, and we realized that we probably had, at least a full feature film on our hands. And so it was at that point when the film was, I would say, about 3/4 of the way done that we started going around and talking to people. And pretty quickly, we got in front of PBS, and they were very interested in the film and called us right away. And we said, guys, we're going to be honest. We're surprised that PBS is interested in a wrestling movie. And they said, well, we'll be honest, we're surprised too. But I think it's been a great relationship because PBS, obviously, nationwide, known for their commitment to quality storytelling, to telling important pieces of history and culture that matter. And PBS North Carolina specifically is so committed to North Carolina film, North Carolina stories. And they saw that that's what this was, that this wasn't just a wrestling film. And there's nothing wrong with just being a wrestling film, obviously. But they saw that this is a sports story. It's a culture story. Mm-hmm. It's a piece of entertainment, a piece of North Carolina history. And they saw that and really invested in that way. And, one of our goals was always that if you're not a wrestling fan, if you've never seen wrestling in your life, you can still come to this film and enjoy it. If you are a wrestling fan, sure, you're going to come to it, learn more about Dorton Arena than you ever knew, and learn some details that you probably didn't know along the way. And PBS was a great partner, both publicly and creatively in the process, to help us kind of walk that line and get this to a great audience.
So Thursday, August 8th. Oh, go ahead, Chris. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to add on to something really quick that Cliff said, and just bring it to your audience, where Dorton was the only major arena that they could run in Eastern North Carolina, right? So there's more than likely, when we say it's a North Carolina story, I'm sure there's a lot of people in your area, in the Greenville area and beyond, who have memories from going to Dorton, because there were smaller events that were ran over there, but that's the only place you go to with 5,000 plus people. And so, it really does become a North Carolina story, because there's so many people that we spoke to that have really distinct memories as a kid, just growing up watching wrestling in Dorton.
So it's When Giants Walk Here, PBS, and it'll air August 8th at 10. And they're having an event on Tuesday the 6th at the Rialto and 5 Points in Raleigh, a Q&A and that sort of thing. Chris, when did you decide, all right, I'm going to pursue wrestling?
So my story starts back, like, I've always wanted to be in broadcasting and journalism. My first job was at the Greensboro News and Record when I was 18, straight out of high school. Got some opportunities to write for them, and then also got hired at 102 Jams in Greensboro, I think when I was 20, or right before I turned 21, 2 months before I turned 21. I then ended up having a full-time job before I graduated at college. Then I was laid off, and a year after college. That's 2009. So a lot of changes for me. And right after college, I was kind of searching. I was working part-time in radio, couldn't find anything full-time. So before I got into television, I was just like, let me just throw everything at the wall. Let me see what sticks, and we're going to go with life that way. And so I was like, I wanted to do this as a kid. I never pursued it because I felt like I had a good thing going with my broadcasting career. So I went to a school called CWF Mid-Atlantic. It's defunct now, based out of Burlington, North Carolina, and I started learning there. And soon after, my television career started. I got a job at WXII in Winston-Salem, and still working part-time at 102 Jams in Greensboro and wrestling all at the same time. So I was just like, whatever sticks. And television ended up being what stuck. But it was some of the best 4 years of my life. A lot of great memories, a lot of great friends who are currently on television with AEW or WWE or TNA right now, including Adam Page, somebody that I used to be in a locker room with a lot with AEW, Cedric Alexander, one of the guys I used to be in the locker room a lot. He's now with WWE. So definitely a big fun time in my life for sure.
Was it as difficult to get in at that time as it was maybe in the Dorton Arena heyday? You always hear stories about, the secret society you were kind of joining. At that point, the business, as they like to say, had changed. The industry had changed. The sport had changed. But how was it trying to get your foot in the door in that business?
I think anybody can pretty much get their foot in the door now. This was 2012 when I got in. Back then, of course, you had to know somebody, you had to be vetted, and still, you hear stories like Hulk Hogan getting his leg broken because somebody didn't like him back in the day. I didn't go through anything like that, but I will say that wrestling isn't for the weak, honestly. Like I didn't have like a big athletics background. I did wrestle a little bit in high school. But there were guys who would come in to the training school. They'd pay their money, and because ultimately it's a business. So if you're going to pay your money, we'll train you. But whatever happens to you after that is what happens to you. There's guys who were, college football players who went to places like Elon or, whatever. And they would come in and they'd have like 2 or 3 weeks, and then it was too tough for them. They'd quit. and so it's tough to go out there and do something where you're getting hurt on purpose. You're falling down on purpose. And, you're about to take this drop kick from, a 250-pound man, like on television looks feathery soft, but still a 250-pound man that's throwing his weight and his foot in your face. So, you've got to learn how to kind of deal with all that. So, it was fun. But I will say, even though it's probably easy for anybody to start the training, it's a lot of people just don't last. It's going to take somebody who's tough and willing to kind of take what comes with it.
All right, Cliff, favorite wrestler of all time and maybe favorite one growing up?
Oh, wow. Growing up, I was one of those kids who always cheered for the bad guys. So my guy growing up was Triple H. Now it's kind of funny. Paul Levesque, he runs the company in WWE now, the same guy. All time, I have, over the years, when I got back into wrestling as an adult, after drifting away in my teenage years, like I think a lot of us do, when I came back, I really got invested in wrestling history and going back and studying some of the stuff that was before my time that I had never really experienced as a kid. And in that, one of my favorite guys became Roddy Piper. Piper, just for his ability to talk, his ability to fight, wrestle, do pretty much anything that there was. We actually have some photos of Roddy in Dorton Arena in the film. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. He would have been at the top of the list for someone to speak to if he was. But yeah, he is definitely at the top of my list in terms of all-time great.
All right, how about you, Chris?
Some of my favorite. I think Bret Hart is at the top of the list, along with Sting. And then, those are the guys that really captured my imagination early on. And then, as I got older and started, I was a preteen and then a teenager, The Rock really was like the guy for me. And then I guess most recently, I've really gotten on to Bryan Danielson, Daniel Bryan. He's somebody similar size as him. I'm, 5'9". When I was wrestling, I was about 195 pounds, and he was more around like 210. But we were similar in size, so he kind of showed me that you can, still be a top guy and being, on the smaller side. So those are some of the guys that really captured my imagination the most.
Is there a follow-up movie of any kind, guys, for this, you think? A follow-up project? I mean, obviously, you guys could have done something on Greensboro Coliseum, which as recently as or maybe was it earlier this year? I think, as recently as the spring, had a sellout for Sting's final show. So, I mean, it's still a huge part of wrestling on the national scope. So, any thoughts to that, or did this take it out of you guys?
I think there will be more. There's nothing particularly on the horizon right now, but in making this film, one of the opportunities that we saw and one of the things that excited us was, as I said before, getting to tell the wrestling story that isn't just a wrestling story, but a piece of culture, a piece of history.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great wrestling documentaries out there today, and I watch them all. But there's kind of a couple of very specific perspectives that you see over and over again. You see the WWE perspective and kind of telling their history, which totally makes sense. That's their product and that's what they do. And then you see, Vice Television has had a lot of great films that mostly focus on some of the darker aspects of wrestling. The Dark Side of the Ring is one of their most famous series. Yep. And all of those, like I said, I watch every single one of them. I love all of them. But I also think that there's room for a more historical, culture-based, telling of wrestling history. I've said in the past that I want to look at wrestling the way that Ken Burns looks at baseball. You don't have to be a baseball fan, but there's so much history, there's so much culture, there's so much that has happened in these sports, in these cultural institutions that impact us to this day. And so as we, worked on this film and kind of found that voice that I think is unique, we've definitely been talking about ways to do more of that and to continue telling an even bigger story of wrestling history in not just the South, but in the country and what wrestling has meant to the country. So I think there definitely will be a follow-up at some point. We're certainly not done. This was kind of our first stab at this kind of thing, and we're excited to do it bigger, do it better next time.
And
Chris,
even with this film in particular, I was just going to say really quick, even with this film in particular, we're not going to be done, with promoting it. We're also, if anybody's familiar with WrestleCade in Winston-Salem, happens every Thanksgiving weekend. It'll also be shown there, and that's been announced recently as well. So, cool. We're going to be pushing this film a lot, and again, we hope to have more for you down the line.
Chris, what was the first time somebody slammed you and it really hurt?
All the bumps hurt for sure. You start getting used to it, but I will say the hardest that's ever happened. there was a guy that I wrestled. He was known in WWE as No Way Jose, but he was a part of my training class. And is one of my good friends, Levis Valenzuela. He's from Durham originally. And he had this, he's Dominican, so he had this Dominican gimmick, and he used what is known as the razor's edge, where it's almost like a power bomb, but he's holding you by your arms, and you just kind of go flat out on your back. And that is the most awkward, hard-hitting bump there.
Yeah.
It's one of those bumps where I hope that you don't have loose bowels and you're not wearing white in the ring, because it might give the crowd a surprise. And luckily I was not wearing white. Luckily I don't have loose bowels, but I definitely felt a little shift inside of me for sure.
I've heard this. What was the ring name, Chris, when you were wrestling? What did you go by?
Just Chris Lee, because at the time I was on radio and television as Chris Lee, so it's
you
kind
were
of like
promoting the
radio.
You were promoting the vehicle.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
So it
well,
was,
there you go.
it was like the whole gimmick was I can do everything. So
Okay. Awesome. Hey, this is great, guys. I hope it's a big success. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for the time here today. Really enjoyed talking to you guys.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Here.
And I
We
think
appreciate it.
the last thing I want to leave you with, if everybody can download the PBS app, if you're not in front of your television on August 8th at 10 o'clock, don't worry. You'll still be able to watch it on the PBS app. You can stream it anytime there. That is really the big push because we know that not a lot of people, watch television at the time things are supposed to come on. So PBS app, it'll be available nationally. So if you happen to be in North Carolina right now hearing about it and you're from Texas or something like that, you can go to Texas, download the PBS app, and you can watch it there right after it's done premiering here. So that's the big push for everybody.
Awesome stuff. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
It's When Giants Walked Here. It'll be on PBS North Carolina Thursday night at 10 o'clock. Looking forward to that. Thanks to Chris and thanks to Cliff for being with us. Thanks to Philip Pilkington as well. All right, back in the morning on Talk of the Town. We have Best of the Patrick Johnson Show for you tomorrow. And then we'll be back Monday. I'll be hosting Talk of the Town then, but also Jenny Dalton Hill scheduled to be with us Monday. Have a great weekend, everybody.